without public comment?
No, you just say the same rules apply.
Same rules apply with public content. Are you on?
Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you.
All right, so first item is tenure. 2018 tenure list.
So the tenure list is presented to you. We have 12 students. We have 12 teachers who we are recommending to the board for tenure. That means at minimum they have 6 satisfactory semester evaluations and have completed a state-approved induction program. And so these are the teachers that are up for approval to move to tenure.
Okay. If you have questions, we're okay moving that forward. Okay, next item is the custodial stipends.
This is a contractual situation where there is a dollar amount just under $6,000 in the current contract with the support staff. And basically this pool of money is to encourage additional certifications that are a benefit to the district. And so you can see by the list of what these gentlemen and ladies have received, it's things like pesticides and asbestos and refrigerant recovery and sewage plant water treatment. And so we have some level of expertise on our own staff to be able to do some of the items that some other districts might have to contract out. And so it really does save a lot of money, more than the $6,000 that is there. But as part of that, the operations department then recommends and makes a list of all of the people who have at least one of these certifications, and then we divide it by the total amount. And this year, each of those units is worth about $250. So depending on how many units the employees have, we take their units times $250. So the total is what is in the contract, but each employee receives something different. So the board is asked to approve those each year. It's a really neat list. It's not something that I've seen in a contract before, and I think is very effective.
Anybody have any questions or comments on that? No? All right, we'll move that forward. Next item, number 4, is the Director of Operations job description revised.
Anytime that we are hiring a new employee, we take the opportunity to look at the job description that is there. That's not the only time we would look at them if someone's been in a job where things have changed dramatically. But with Mr. Loeffler's retirement and the hiring of Mr. Harper, there was an opportunity to take a look at the job description. And so really there are 2 different types of changes that are in there. On the first page, really under essential duties, items 4 through 6 are just clarifications of similar things that were done by Mr. Loeffler that will continue to be done by Mr. Harper. It just makes it a little clearer in terms of what the responsibilities around the safety committee and the annual budget and those types of things are. Items 28 through 30, which are brand new items, really show how the position has changed, and those are really software specific requirements that now are part of the job. They're just our softwares that this person needs to be able to operate because they are a part of the systems that we use across the district. And so we wanted to delineate those major systems that are there for Mr. Harper, and he obviously, we have shared this job description with him in draft to say here's kind of what we're interviewing you for, have compared his skills against this and are very confident that he's going to be a wonderful candidate for us.
Any questions or concerns? Nope. All right, so we'll move that forward. And the next item, number 5, volunteers.
Wanted to have a conversation with the committee and the board members who are here in terms of volunteers and the definition. As Ms. Baines-Clemens said, that how the state defines a volunteer is just the minimum of what school districts must require. And so school districts can choose to do more than that if you want, as long as they're legal. And so we need to make sure that we are comfortable with that. It really falls into 2 conversations like that have with you. One is the tuberculosis test. Currently, we are requiring TB tests for all volunteers. The law requires a TB test only for volunteers who are employed on average for greater than 10 hours per week during their employment. So we have almost no volunteers who would fit that definition that are in our buildings more than 10 hours per week when you average it out. And so if it is agreeable, the recommendation we would have is that we remove that requirement for everyone except for volunteer coaches. We do think that volunteer coaches during season, some of them may have that level of responsibility. We also think that student contact is obviously, I think, different from what a other volunteer would be into in terms of the school. The only other piece that would stay that is part of the law is the option that they would need to be evaluated if they are exposed to TB. So if there's knowledge that there's a country where there's an outbreak and someone has been traveling to that country, the law would allow us to say, well, we do want you, because you happen to be in, wherever, Conshohocken, that we do want you to be tested for, we do want you to be tested for TB. And the law would allow us to do that, so that would not change in terms of our rights from that standpoint. But I would recommend, and Ms. McHale and I have spoken about this, that we would remove that for volunteers, except for volunteer coaches.
And then for volunteer coaches, would we only require them to get it once?
There is no, the 5-year piece that you were talking about is required for the other clearances through state law, but not TB test. We actually do not currently require it every 5 years. So we would not in the future, because we don't currently do that anyway. And so no, there would be no renewal. The only requirement would be if you were exposed.
I just want to share, this was, there were a lot of parents when this change first happened that were very upset about this TB test, because there are some people who test positive for TB, and then they have to get a chest x-ray to prove to their kid's school that they don't have tuberculosis so they can go on a field trip. And, we have parents that can't go on their kid's field trip because they don't want to pay the money to go get a chest x-ray, and we lost a lot of cafeteria people volunteering in our cafeterias because of that tuberculosis test, because some people who are here from other countries, European countries, some of them were vaccinated when they were kids for TB, and so if you were ever vaccinated for TB, you will always get a false positive. And so for all of those people, they can't volunteer unless they get a chest x-ray, and they're like, you know what, it's not to prove to my kid's school that I don't have tuberculosis to go on a field trip where they're going to be around everyone else in that museum that also hasn't been screened for tuberculosis. So I think it's a situation where we make lives easier for people, and are we really, is this really protecting anyone by doing this? So I think this is a win-win. I think people are going to be thrilled.
Yeah, I have to agree. There's going to be a great big hallelujah if we can do this for people, because it is quite burdensome for folks to have to go out and get a TB test. Even my own family, it caused a lot of inconvenience. And for my husband, who his deal is going to their 4th grade Harrisburg trip and the 5th grade Gettysburg trip. That's the only time that he's in the schools, and he had to go and spend the money and the time to get the clearances. And I thought that that's a way to discourage a lot of people from being involved in a way that we should want them to be involved. So in my opinion, the sooner you can do this, the better.
And it's 2 doctor's appointments, because you have to go back a second time, so you have to miss work twice to go back to the doctor so they can make sure there's no little bubble on your hand.
I'm feeling a little guilty because this was Ms. McHale's idea, and she's not here to take the credit. So if this is going to be popular, I want to say out loud that Ms. McHale recommended this. She is not feeling well this evening. The second part of volunteer is the one that is more, it is less clear-cut, because the state puts the onus on us to decide what they mean by the words they choose. The other piece is, what is the difference between a visitor and a volunteer? That is how I separate them. I don't call them class 1 and class 2, although I think that's a novel idea. I want to delineate somewhere between a visitor and a volunteer, and in this district, volunteers must have their clearances, visitors do not. So for instance, you go to a 4th grade concert, you do not have to have your clearances to go to a 4th grade concert. You do not have to have your clearances to go to back to school night. And so there are lots of times where you walk into a school and you do not need your clearances. The school board is then, because the state has not clearly defined it, has to make the definition as to what do you require clearances for. Now this is separate from the TB test. Okay, so right now we connect these 2 things. We have now taken TB test off of this. But there are 3 other clearances that we require all volunteers to have. They are the child abuse, the PA criminal record check. They are both free as long as you do them correctly on the website. And then there is the FBI fingerprinting, which does come with a cost. I had to get it for this job. It was $27.50 when I got it a couple months ago. The locations are no longer convenient because the state has outsourced it. And so it used to be that you could do it lots of places. It now has about 4 places within 20 miles of us, and that's it, which means appointments are hard. Now, those are required by the law. We can't choose to say a volunteer doesn't have to have those because they're required by state law. What you get the choice of is how do you define volunteer? Again, the state language is regular and repeated contact, so you get to decide what that means, as well as direct supervision of children. They used to use the words care, supervision, guidance, or control of children, but I think control got them in trouble. So they went with direct supervision of children. And so currently, like many school districts, Penn Ridge has a very broad definition of those, and almost anyone who walks into our schools to help in schools as opposed to attend something is classified as a volunteer and is required to have their clearances. Now the clearances are good for 5 years. 3 years ago, this was pretty onerous because it was new, and so a lot of families who over the last 3 years, if you've had kids, especially in elementary school, but also in middle and high school, it was a hard change for some families. Ms. McHale has told me that in the 3 years there have been more than 2,000 volunteers, and that she gets fewer and fewer phone calls every year about this. And so I want to be clear that her recommendation is that we continue the definition as it pertains to these 3. For volunteers, and that's how we define volunteers. That is beyond what the law requires you to do if you, like I do, see the difference between regular contact and mystery reader. But currently a mystery reader is a volunteer in this school district. And so we need to make sure that you are comfortable with that definition. It is currently the practice, and so it will not be a change for anyone. And so it will only be first-time parents who are coming into the school that are doing this primarily at the elementary level. Although it does happen with a field trip, that all of a sudden 2 weeks before the field trip, they need a chaperone, you say, yes, I want to do it, and you can't get it done because the fingerprinting, often you can't get in, sometimes. And so you have to decide what you're comfortable with and not in terms of that definition.
So our mystery readers have to have their clearance?
Currently.
I feel like they should be a visitor. My own personal take, I feel like they're not left alone working with a group of students to do math manipulatives or, they're reading in front of the class and then they're getting out of there. And I feel like the teachers sitting there in the classroom watching them the entire time they're in contact or in front of the children. I just feel like they should be designated visitors.
I think that's a good point, and also what happens on career day when we have people coming in and presenting? Does that limit how many people with different careers will come in and do a presentation in the front of the room because they have to get clearances just to come in front and tell them about their job when the teacher is still in the room? I think it limits the number of people that we can get in here when they have to go through that. And also, how does this affect kids who want to participate in opportunities where they shadow someone for a job? Because based on these policies, I believe if you go to shadow someone, say you want to do something where you're shadowing someone and you get an excuse from the school, I believe, this is what I've heard, and you can clarify for me if I'm accurate, but if they go to a business, everyone in that business needs to get their clearances for that kid to go in and shadow that day. And so so it's limiting our kids' opportunities to go and shadow people because it requires that whole, and they're like, well, I'm not gonna have my whole entire staff get clearances so this kid can come in and shadow us for the day. And so those kinds of things, I think, limit our kids. And so if we can change that, I think that would be helpful.
I don't know the answer about whole businesses, but I do know that if you use the definition and talk about direct supervision, if a child is going out to shadow in a business, whoever is responsible for them in that business would fit under this definition. And so we'd have to be careful that we're not saying that wouldn't, because that person is now in direct control of that child during that time. There's not a teacher there that is doing that. And so we would have to think about what that looks like, and I will do some digging in terms of the whole businesses because I'm not aware of that. I did promise, like I said, Ms. McHale did want to advocate for keeping the current procedure, and I do want to at least be, I want to represent her point well. The other side of why many school districts, including Penn Ridge, have very broad definitions of this is because there are opportunities if you are in schools that something could happen, right? There are kids, there are adults. Now, I'm not sure of this policy one way or another. I think it does add a layer of protection. It obviously does not add a layer of guarantee. We cannot do that in the system. But if someone's in being a mystery reader, that means they still are walking to the bathroom, or they're still walking in the hallway where there might be kids. They are not escorted from one position to another if they're a volunteer. And so we do need to make sure that you are comfortable. There are plenty of school districts that define it both ways. I've actually worked in 2 other systems, and they define it both ways. One of them defines it very similar to how Penridge currently does, and one does not. One makes the mystery reader, and they basically say if you are not alone with a child or directly responsible for them or here all the time, you are a visitor, you are not a volunteer. That's how they define the difference. And then we go case by case and say, okay, when we're talking about mystery readers, what are we saying? When we talk about people helping at the spring fair, what are we saying, right? Because there are lots of things that happen in schools that you need to say, is that direct supervision of a kid? And it always comes down to who's responsible and who is supervising. Is the teacher really responsible? I see this differently if you're working out in the hallway with a small group of students on math facts, as opposed to you're running a small group within the classroom, right, to help with, reading rotations or something like that. But ultimately, we are well within our rights to do whatever level of broadness you'd like. It just really is what is the board comfortable with in terms of above the minimum expected by the law.
Can I ask a question about chaperones, though? I'm just thinking, so our students who go on field trips, we take students outside of the school, kindergarten through 12th grade, but, so a chaperone theoretically would have supervision over a child in a restroom situation, and if we're going to remove that clearance from them, we couldn't do that. Okay, all right, I got you. All right, I wanted to make sure.
They just don't need a TV
Well,
test.
Okay, all right. Because I was going to say, we'll have to have a whole new set of rules for, okay.
Field trips is one of those areas that I think is very clear in this policy, that anyone who is chaperoning a group of students would need to have their clearances, that we need to make sure, because you obviously are responsible for that small group of students at that time.
Could we maybe look at, since you said we have a lot of flexibility in this area, could we maybe get a list together of the things that would fall into each category and then the things that are in the gray area? And then we can maybe decide we can decide item by item, is this like a silly requirement, or, is this a good idea? And kind of differentiate it that way, right?
We certainly can do that, and my understanding is that list was created when the volunteers were talked about, so I think at least some level of that list exists. My concern would be that there needs to be a working definition of what we're talking about, so that when something new comes up, the principals know what we're referring to. And so I think principals understand that anybody who's going to be helping with kids is a volunteer right now, and so they get that definition. If we loosen that, we just need to make sure we let them know where those lines are. And so maybe going through that list will help us internally, but I would not recommend that the board then say, okay, well, if there's a new activity, bring it before us and we'll decide yes or no. There ought to be some level of, here's what we mean by this. And so if it's like a mystery reader, you follow that rule. If it's like a, whatever, something else that's not a mystery reader, a small group in the hallway, then you would do that from that standpoint. So I can produce that list. I think I would recommend that we are going to need to look at 916 anyway. So why don't we bring 916 back, do this within a policy, have that conversation around those activities, and see whether that helps us provide some clarification on the language, if that's acceptable to the board.
From that standpoint, though, did we decide, I think we decided on the TV one, though, right? Is everybody good on that? Is everybody okay with that change?
Yeah, I'm okay on the TV, and that was my question, just because all the back-to-school folders explain the 4 requirements that you need, and I had a little inside information and knew that TV was going to be a topic of discussion, so I didn't push for that one. I did my other 3 first. What about all those other parents that are maybe out there trying to get all 4 done in these next 3 weeks before are you already on it?
I would recommend that we continue to follow our policy until it is no longer our policy. I would suggest that at the September board meeting, we put an item on that releases the TB test from those requirements, because you could do that, right? And then you vote on that, you give the public time to comment on that as to whether they agree or disagree with that decision. You then make your decision, and then on September 25th, I can send a Blackboard Connect that says, congratulations. If you want to whisper in your friends' ears and say, if you're not volunteering before September 25th, go ahead. But I am uncomfortable recommending to you that we choose to assume policy before it is policy. Okay? As long as you're comfortable with that.
Could we send out a message letting them know that that topic is going to be on the board agenda for that night, and that a decision will come out of that that would affect whether or not they would need it? That way, you know, I'm just thinking about the parent who just got it 2 days before, and they're like, "Are you kidding? You didn't tell me? You couldn't have told me 2 days ago that if I waited 2 days, that would have been okay?"
Yes, we could send something to say that there is a change being considered at the September 24th that would change the requirement for the TB test for anyone outside of volunteer coaches. And so that if you are not in need of those immediately and would like to wait until that conversation happens, we would encourage that you wait until the end of the month. I will clarify that with the principals, because they're going to be the ones answering the questions, so that they understand what I mean by that, so that everyone's on the same page. Yeah.
Or we could just follow our policy. Sounds good too.
Sounds like we're giving an option on an option again.
Well, no, I think it's saying to people, because there are some people who are, you know, very proactive and want to get everything all lined up and take care of this before, you know, too much time goes by. But then how many instances are going to occur before September 24th? And like Megan said, someone gets it on September 21st, and then we say, if you don't need it, they're like, eh. So if it's a possibility, as a parent, I already have them, so it doesn't make a difference. But I would appreciate knowing that it's pending, and then give them the option to just take a breath and slow down, don't have to go rushing out to go get everything.
Or if they watch the videos, they'll see it.
That's true.
I'm going to get a headline.
This could be their test, that could be their reward.
We can put this
For
out
watching
on
the
the new
video.
Facebook, right?
Yeah.
The link to their Facebook page.
We
There
should
you
have
go.
a little mystery thing in every video, and give them a prize if they
Yeah.
The only thing I wanted to mention was, I think in today's world, it's really important that we keep our standards for who's a volunteer more strict. I would rather be more covered than less covered. So personally, I would want to know that even if they're coming in to be a mystery reader, if that teacher steps out for a moment, that person has their clearances. I want to make that clear. That I would not be in favor at all of loosening those rules and policy.
Well, I thought when you're a mystery reader, I didn't think the teacher could leave the room. Like, you're not allowed to step out, no bathroom break. You're there with that mystery reader until
I
they
thought
leave.
another certified.
Yeah.
Okay.
And I just want to be, I'm sorry, and so I just want to be clear that on the September board meeting, the only thing for your consideration will be the changing of the TB test requirement. Because Ms. Dahl makes a wonderful point, that you will have to make a decision as to whether you're going to lessen the broadness of the volunteer definition, but that has nothing to do with the legalities of the TB test currently. Okay, thank you.
And I think that's why it's important to go through that list and look at, so we make sure that we cover all of that.
All right. Public comment? None? All right.